Yeah, I don't think Mother knew about this.
Uncle Marvin was strangled by his own beard.
Yep, you never saw it coming.
And welcome, America, to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. Well, it is great to have you along today. We have a fascinating guest to talk to. He's a Texas man, well, actually from New York originally, though he doesn't sound like it. His name is Matamba Austin, and he grew up believing he was a Caribbean boy because both his parents were Caribbean, so he thought. And then at 27, without the benefit of DNA, he learned something that took him on a journey that has lasted over 2 decades. And you're going to want to hear this story coming up starting in about 10 minutes or so. Right now, it's time to head out to Boston. David Allen Lambert is standing by, the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. Hello, David.
Hey, Fish, how's it going today?
Grand and glorious. Let us get going on our Family Histoire news because we got a lot of it to cover.
We do indeed. Well, I'm going to talk about a rebel. And during the American Revolution, most of our ancestors were rebels, unless you're me and have some loyalists in there. Well, anyways, I'm going to talk about General Richard Montgomery, who was slain at the Battle of Quebec. He was on the rebel forces and was killed December 31st, 1775. He was quickly buried, and when the British saw his burial, they decided he was an officer, dug him up. He was buried in the snow, mind you. And there was a rebel with him. Well, this rebel was a Newfoundland dog. It was his companion, and he stayed by the general's side even after he had been buried. And this is a remarkable story because after they reburied the general in the ground, the dog started to dig him up. Oh. Well, this dog became part of the British Army, probably not willingly signing over from the American side, and traveled all the way back to England in 1783. And his offspring later were in the British Army.
That's crazy. So this dog was on both sides of the Revolutionary War through no choice of its own.
I know. It's amazing to think this dog might have a chance of joining the SAR.
Right. Well, yes.
But he'd have to have really good pedigree. Mm-hmm. American Historical Association, Fish. Have you heard of that before?
I have not. Have you?
Well, I did recently. In fact, our good friend Melanie McComb was telling me about dissertation she was searching on this website, and it's called secure.historians.org. Fish, on there are over 59,000 dissertations that you can search for free from over 204 history departments in the U.S. and Canada. So, it's like AI technology. Well, put in a topic, see what you can find. Well, you can see what somebody already wrote, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Wow. And I'm looking at this, and it looks like you can actually have a free account.
Free is good for me. So give it a try. You might find an ancestor who was famous, or a battle, or a town, or a subject matter, and see how to get that dissertation, or contact the student that's currently working on it. Maybe you can add to what they're working on. Well, one thing that I found fascinating, I've really never given a lot of thought, what did my ancient ancestors wear? Well, tunics, I suppose, if they have Roman connections. Rome is great for fashion now, even then. So in 113 AD, we know that there's a 12-foot thick, 98-foot tall bas relief called Trajan's Column that has the Romans, ready for this, not wearing tunics, but wearing pants. So,
wow.
Sometime around the 110s, this was fashionable enough to put it in stone. So,
you think about that. They went from being banned to required by the Roman Empire.
Exactly. Well, speaking of Romans, over in Israel right now, while they were in the same caves that they were looking and found the Dead Sea Scrolls, well, they found, ready for this, 4 1900-year-old Roman swords still in the leather and wooden scabbards.
Wow.
And it's amazing because, you would find a sword generally in an archaeological find and it's rotted away and it's rusty. Yeah, these are, there's a little bit of rust in them, but to have the leather or wooden scabbards is a rare thing, and to find 4 is amazing. So
that is astonishing. Those caves, I mean, they just are the gift that keep on giving.
They really are. And what else will they find? Well, one of the things about archaeological sites, and of course I've seen recently in the news about tourists putting graffiti on the Colosseum and getting caught, it's becoming a big problem. Well, this has been going on for hundreds of years. In fact, they're looking at European 19th century graffiti and earlier graffiti in ancient Egypt, where people would go and visit a temple and scratch their name in it. Well, these scratches now are more interesting than before, and the vandalism and the names and carvings are being studied. So,
really? So they might actually connect them to people back in Europe? Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. The vandalism from long ago, now you can find out about it from an archaeologist.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the last story is a little hideous, but I want to share it because it has to do with DNA and, of course, people's ancestors. A Berlin museum is now studying the descendants of skulls that were stolen from an African colony. In fact, they've now found descendants from these burials that were probably dug up in the 19th or pre-World War I, and they're connecting it to people in Tanzania. Fish, they have, ready for this, over 1,100 skulls.
Wow. So they're tying them to the people that own those skulls. And what are they going to do with them? Return them to the families?
Yeah, there's repatriation planned. Pretty amazing. And apparently they have a collection of over 7,700 skulls that they're working on. But the first 1,100, they're from the German East African colonies and now just Tanzania.
Wow.
Amazing.
That is incredible.
Well, that's what I have for you right now. But don't forget, if you're not an American Ancestors member, we'd love to have you join. And the coupon code EXTREME will save you $20 on that purchase.
All right. And that's a great purchase, too. Lots of great stuff on AmericanAncestors.org. David, thank you very much. We will be back with you at the back end of the show as we answer some questions on Ask Us Anything. And coming up next, we're going to talk to Matamba Austin, a Texas man with a story you won't believe, when we return in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show.
Have you hit a brick wall in your family tree? Are you unsure how to use your DNA test results to resolve a research question? Do you want to travel where your ancestors walked and need to find details before you go? Need help joining a lineage society? Whatever your genealogy research question, the answer is Legacy Tree Genealogist. Legacy Tree Genealogist has been helping clients all over the globe discover their story since 2004. Legacy Tree has carefully selected and trained professionals who specialize in hundreds of countries and languages, as well as probate research and DNA analysis. And when you need experts on the ground in the countries where your ancestors came from, Legacy Tree Genealogists calls upon its global network of on-site researchers who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. That's legacytree.com.
Hi, Genies. Fisher here, major fan of digitized newspapers. And how about a digitized newspaper site that has well over 800 million searchable pages? There is such a site. It's newspapers.com. They've got newspapers from all across the U.S., UK, Canada, Australia, and beyond. This is where you'll find those remarkable stories, plus birth and marriage announcements, obituaries, photos, ads, and so much more. Newspapers.com is where I found my great aunt's marriage announcement, which was huge since her marriage was not properly recorded. And then there's the story of one relative's 50th anniversary party in 1900, with a list of all the attendees and gifts. Newspapers.com is like that box of chocolates we always hear about. You never know what you're going to get. What will you find? Sign up now at newspapers.com. Use the coupon code EXTREME at checkout to get a special extended 20% discount on a Publisher Extra subscription. Hey, Genies, as we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. Hey, welcome back to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth. And as you know, if you've been a regular listener to this show over the last 10 years, we love those stories from ordinary people with extraordinary finds. Not that we like to call anybody ordinary, but it just means that anybody can find remarkable tales in their past. And that is certainly the case with my next guest. He is Matamba Austin. He lives down in Frisco, Texas. And Matamba, welcome to the show. Just delighted to have you.
Thank you, Scott. I really appreciate you doing this with me.
Now, you don't sound like a New Yorker, and I'm very familiar with them, but I know you were born in Manhattan and raised there with a mom who worked in the UN, so you got a lot of background there.
Yeah, I kind of grew up in a melting pot inside of a melting pot, at least how I think of it. In addition to growing up in Manhattan, I got to go to school at a place called United Nations International School. It's a school in Manhattan for children of diplomats and employees. And so I guess I don't have an accent because there were probably 100 different countries represented in the student body. And so that was how I grew up.
Boy, what a great experience for you, too. Now, your mom served in the UN for how long?
Over 30 years. Served all over the world, doing all kinds of things.
So you got to see the world then?
I did, more than most people get to. I was very grateful for that.
That's incredible. And then your mom was of Caribbean background, as was your father as you grew up.
That's right. My mother's from Guyana, and my father's from Haiti, and I thought I was Caribbean American. You know, that's the family I was presented with.
But 24 years ago, there was not DNA as we have it today. You found out something entirely different. Let's go through this remarkable story.
Well, I just graduated from law school, and my girlfriend had saved up her airline miles and had surprised me with the gift of a trip anywhere I wanted to go with her in the world. And so I'd never been to sub-Saharan Africa. And so I went to my mother, who literally knows somebody in every country in the world you might think of.
Yeah.
And I was just hoping that she could help me pick a place to go to and maybe, you know, send me in the direction of somebody she knew there. And the conversation got into a fight because she was really uncomfortable about the notion of me going to Africa, and I didn't understand why. And so in the middle of the fight, she kind of yelled at me. She said, "You're just like your father. It's always you against the world." And that really puzzled me because the man who I knew as my father was the most conflict-averse person you'll ever meet. He never, ever, ever, ever starts a fight. But, you know, I didn't think of it in the moment. And so we went our separate ways. And then I went to sleep that night. And I had the strangest dream that I hadn't had since I was a child. It was me as a very young child. And I could tell I was young because I had to reach up to hold the hand of the adult I was with. I couldn't make out the face of the person I was with, but I could tell it was a man. And we were somewhere in New York. And he was walking down the street. And I think he just wanted me to understand that he had to leave for some reason.
Okay.
And that was the whole dream. I woke up. And then the next night I had it again. And then the next night I had it a third time. I'm kind of going crazy, right? I'm like, what is this? So I went back to my mother and I told her everything I'm telling you. And I asked her, why am I having this dream? And she looked at me and she just said, it's because your father's not your father.
Oh.
That's how I found out at the age of 27.
27. That had to be a sock in the gut.
Well, it kind of turns your world upside down. I mean, the one thing you think you know is who you are.
Sure. Right. Your identity. And you were Caribbean through and through.
I thought so. So I asked her, then who's my father? And she said that when she was younger, she met and fell in love with a man from Angola. They got married. They had me. And that he went to go fight in the battle for independence for Angola. It was a Portuguese colony. And he was killed. And that was that. And so she met the man who I know as my father right after. And so they thought I was so young at the time that they probably shouldn't burden me with this. And so they never did.
And that was it. And so did she give you names? Did she give you family? What did she tell you about this man?
Well, I asked a whole bunch of questions, and she gave me his first name. And I asked about surviving family, and she said he was an orphan because there's a massive civil war in Angola that went on for over 30 years. I asked her if she had any artifacts or anything, and she said that she was so mad when she found out that he was killed that she threw everything out. And so that's all I had to go on was a name.
Roadblocks.
She didn't even have a picture, just nothing.
Yeah. Wow. You have seen the world. Obviously, you've gone through law school. You're a practical person. You can put these things together. But, I mean, you didn't hardly have anything but like a tiny little thread to start with in this journey to identify who this man was, right?
That's right. That's right. And so I went to my girlfriend and I told her the story. And she asked me how I was feeling. And I said, well, I was feeling kind of upset, but more at him than at her, because I was thinking, no matter how patriotic you might feel, why would you leave a young woman and a baby to fend for themselves alone in New York City in the 1970s? And my girlfriend, who I'm now married to, by the way, she's very empathetic and very intuitive. And so she just looked at me and she said, well, your mother said you're just like him. So what would make you do something like that? And it stopped me in my tracks because I hadn't considered that.
Wow.
So I took a pause and I said, well, I would only do it if I would be leaving to accomplish something that would be hugely important for the independence movement and for my family. It would have to be something that I was uniquely qualified to do, and I would have to have a reasonable chance of success so I could get back to my family.
Yeah.
And she said, makes sense. So there's got to be more to this story. And that started us on a 20-year quest to figure out why he left.
Yeah, I'll bet. And to find out who he was and to go to your home country and all of this. What an incredible thing. So where does this begin? I mean, you had a first name and you had a country, and that's it, right?
Well, we started in the traditional way that you and your guests so well explain on your other episodes, right? In terms of, we said, let's go hit the paper first. And so I went to the birth certificate that my family has for me. And that's the first time that I ever realized that there are no parents' names listed on it. And so I had to go to the state and request a reprint of my original birth certificate. And that's when I saw my father's full name. And the next thing I thought was, okay, maybe my stepfather formally adopted me. And so I thought, let me go check the court records to see if in those proceedings there was any details about what happened to my father.
It's good to be a lawyer, isn't it?
Exactly. So you put certain lens on, you know, you look at the world in a certain way. And so I literally went to the New York City court systems. And back then, I mean, this is before digital anything. Right?
Sure.
So I literally had to go to the court offices. And so I went to the county court office and I gave them my names and I looked up in the system, and they handed me a laminate of a newspaper article that described the warehouse fire, which had occurred a few years ago that destroyed thousands of records from that time. Oh. And so that's as far as the paper chase took us there.
And so now you had to start in a whole different direction.
Exactly. And that's when we had to start getting really just out of the box creative. And so I went back to my mother. I said, well, how did he get here? Right? I mean, how do you get from war-torn Angola in the 1970s as a refugee to New York? And she said, well, maybe it was a kind of a mission scholarship. And so I thought, okay, mission sounds like a church scholarship, maybe the Catholics. And so I literally got out the phone book, Scott, because it was phone books back then.
Yeah.
And I started cold calling every single Catholic university in New York City. And I eventually got the registrar of Fordham University on the phone. And I asked her if she was a genealogy fan. And she said she was. And so I told her the story I'm telling you. And I asked her if she'd be willing to just check the records for a college transcript of somebody with my father's name around the 1970s. And she did. She said yes. And that's how she found my father's college transcript. And that was the second piece of paper I ever found that proved that he existed.
Wow. Wow. And did it give some information in there to help you going back to Africa?
It gave us his birthplace in Angola, a place called Milan.
Okay.
And when we looked it up, we found that it was the location of a queendom of one of the greatest queens in African history. Her name was Queen Nzinga. And the name of her queendom was Matamba.
Ah, and that's your name.
Exactly. So that's how we started realizing that we must be on the right track.
Mm-hmm.
And so we tried for years to figure out, how does one find a family history in the middle of a country that's had a 40-year civil war before the digital age. And it's really, 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 really hard. We reached out to people and nobody could tell us anything. And it wasn't until newspapers started digitizing records that we started finding any more of a paper trail. And back then, the mainstream newspapers didn't have a lot of articles that talked about what was going on in what we now today call the Black Power movement. But there were Black newspapers, really small newspapers all over the country, in cities all across the country, that did report on it. And my wife, who's a super sleuth in her own right and a big genealogy fan, she found this newspaper archive of this small newspaper of a Black revolutionary in Newark, New Jersey. And they had articles talking about my father as a revolutionary leader that helped start one of the independence parties that was fighting for independence for Angola.
Oh, my goodness. That had to be a key find for you.
Well, there were pictures of him talking to crowds of people about the revolution in Africa and how people here needed to do what they can to support him.
Wow. What was that like the first time you saw a picture of your birth father?
It was unbelievable because I looked just like him.
Is that right? So you knew then. It was like, yep, this is all for real.
Yeah, it became really, really real in that moment. He was just a concept, just a shadow and a dream for me until then. But looking at his face, it felt like I was looking at myself just 20 years older.
And then we find out that there are other connections that ties him to the United States. We got to take a break here, Matamba, and continue with this conversation about the mysterious father he learned he had at the age of 27. When we return in 5 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, we are back on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. I am talking to Matamba Austin. He lives in Texas. He's a New York native. Thought he was a Caribbean lad as he was growing up, and then found out at the age of 27 his father wasn't his father. Now, 24 years later, he knows the identity of that man as a revolutionary from Angola who was killed in a war there. And we're just talking about the trail you've been following all these years, Matamba, over 2 decades. How did you finally get this thing going, and what did you learn?
Well, Scott, it was a lot of luck, and there was a lot of kindness of complete strangers that just decided to help. So maybe a perfect example of that is the trail had run cold for us up until 2020. And in the middle of everything that was happening that year and how crazy it was, I was looking for some inspiration, and I found a blog post of an interview with some professors talking about Angolan politics in the 1970s during the revolution. And I reached out to one of them, and they suggested I contact a journalist who told me about the party that my father helped to form. And that's how we started learning not just about what he was doing, but who he was doing it for.
Who he was with. Yeah, the fan approach. Friends, associates, and neighbors.
Exactly. And this journalist, he turns out he was a child soldier for that very same party. And so he was really committed to helping us find more about what my father was doing and maybe even how he got killed. And so in the course of doing that research, my wife found this article written by a journalist for the Washington Post in the 1970s that actually got escorted on foot hundreds of miles to the secret base of this party in the middle of the jungle in Angola. And he thanked this graduate student with getting him the intro to the leaders of this party. And my wife picked out that article because the graduate student went to the same university that I did. She was a graduate student at Harvard. And so when my wife found that, she came running to tell me because there's an online directory of alumni that you can look up. And so she suggested I go check that directory. And we did. And it turns out that graduate student is no longer a graduate student. She's now a professor right here in North Dallas.
No kidding. Right near where you live.
Right where we live. And so we reached out to her and she agreed to talk to us. And it turns out that she met my father. She knew who my father was.
No kidding. Wow.
And so again, it was 2020 in the middle of the lockdown. So we did this by Zoom. And as soon as I came on the screen, she just gasped. She said, "You look just like your father." And that's how we knew that she'd met him.
Incredible. Yeah, that would be the first clue, right? So was she able to tell you stories about him or something about her interactions?
Well, she blew our minds. She told us that she got to work with him because she had fallen in love with and married another member of the party who was based out in Europe. And so when she came back to the United States to continue her studies, he introduced her to their U.S. representative. So it turns out that my father was representing the party in the United States, and that's what he was doing when he met my mother. And then she told us that he was here on a scholarship that was secretly funded by the CIA.
What?
That's what we said. We're like, really? And she said, yeah, that was happening a lot in those days. And so, Scott, I as my day job, I work on I'm not a genealogist. I'm not a historian. I work on mergers and acquisitions, right? That's what I do for a living.
Okay.
But part of that job involves screening companies for our clients, right? In terms of our clients want to know, is this company really real? Are they as good as what they claimed? Are their finances in order? And so I thought, well, okay, let me see if I can find the scholarship that she's talking about. And let me see if I could follow the money and see who's really funding them.
Wow. Okay.
And so we found the scholarship. The reason why we found it is because what she talked about is my father had a United States passport, and that was a key fact because back in the 70s, there were a lot of countries in Africa and in Latin America that were fighting for independence, and there were a lot of revolutionaries that were, for all intents and purposes, classified as domestic terrorists by the European countries that were colonizing those countries and were resisting their moves for independence.
Sure.
And so if you were a freedom fighter, you were effectively also a refugee, which means you had no papers, you had no passport, you had no nothing. And so the question was, well, how did he get a U.S. passport? The research that we did, we only found one scholarship program that was for freedom fighters in Southern Africa, that if you were selected for the program, you could get a United States passport as opposed to some kind of a temporary visa. And the details of the scholarship were really, really fuzzy. It was supposedly through the State Department, but there were like no details. But they did contract with a third-party organization to administer the scholarship. And that was the company I looked into because I said, okay, if it's a normal company, then they'll have paperwork. And the company's now defunct, but it turns out that they had donated all of their corporate materials to the Special Archives Department at UMass Amherst. And so that archivist team, by the way, they're amazing. Archivists are like the heroes of genealogy.
Oh, yes, they are.
Concerned.
Yep.
So I contacted them, and they agreed to let me root through their company documents and do good old-fashioned corporate due diligence, which is what I did. And sure enough, I was able to find paperwork that proved that even though it was a State Department program, it was actually a CIA program.
Wow.
Actually, the CIA has this whole archive that you can find at cia.gov, if you can believe it, of documents that they've declassified over the years. And I found a declassified memo where they talked about that specific company as one of their secret affiliate organizations, and they wanted to keep it secret.
What a discovery. So as a result of this now, did your contact in Dallas actually have any pictures of him?
She didn't. But when I finally went back to my mother's siblings, one sibling in particular, who's one of my favorite aunts, everybody has one relative that's always the one that takes pictures at family gatherings.
Yep.
So we went to that aunt and my uncle, who she's married to. And we told her that we know the truth, that my father is somebody else. And so they agreed to show me the pictures that they had of him. and they showed me my parents' wedding photo.
Oh, no kidding. So you have that now.
So we have that now. And that's how I was able to confirm that the person you've been hearing about is the same guy in the newspaper articles, the same guy in the transcript, the same guy in the birth certificate. That's how we were able to confirm it.
Have you been able to meet any relatives over in Africa? Have you been to Africa?
Well, my mother told me he was an orphan, remember? And so we weren't even looking for that because we believed that. But it turns out that wasn't the case either. I do have relatives that are also revolutionaries, and some of whom were, some of whom weren't. It turns out I have a huge family in Africa that never knew I existed.
And when you found them, how did they receive you?
It was the most amazing, life-changing experience I've ever had. They treated us like we had been lost to them for 50 years, which I had been. Mm-hmm. And so it was the most amazing thing.
And when did you get to go?
Last year.
Just last year. Wow.
We had to wait for all of the lockdowns and all of that stuff. And so it was unbelievable. They took us to where I'm from, where my father was born. They introduced us to hundreds of relatives, it felt like.
Wow. Is there a grave for your father?
No, because he was assassinated. And so there's no grave. His body's never been recovered. But there is an eyewitness to his assassination, and we're still looking for her. And I'm hoping she's listening to this.
Well, what a story. It's Matumba Austin from just north of Dallas, Texas, a little town called Frisco. What a tale. Talk about ordinary people with extraordinary finds and how they found it. I don't think we can get into all the details of how you found all of this, Matumba, but I wish we could talk longer. This is an incredible tale, and congratulations on it. And I'm sure this story is not over yet.
Well, my encouragement to everyone listening to this is if you don't think your family has anything interesting, it's worth looking. Stick with it. You never know what you're going to find.
It really is true. All right. Thanks so much for coming on.
You bet, Scott. Thanks for what you're doing.
And coming up next, David Allen Lambert with another round of Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Hi, Genies. Fisher here, major fan of digitized newspapers. And how about a digitized newspaper site that has well over 800 million searchable pages? There is such a site. It's newspapers.com. They've got newspapers from all across the U.S., UK, Canada, Australia, and beyond. This is where you'll find those remarkable stories, plus birth and marriage announcements, obituaries, photos, ads, and so much more. Newspapers.com is where I found my great aunt's marriage announcement, which was huge since her marriage was not properly recorded. And then there's the story of one relative's 50th anniversary party in 1900, with a list of all the attendees and gifts. Newspapers.com is like that box of chocolates we always hear about. You never know what you're going to get. What will you find? Sign up now at newspapers.com. Use the coupon code EXTREME at checkout to get a special extended 20% discount on a Publisher Extra subscription. Hey, Genies. As we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies.
Have you hit a brick wall in your family tree? Are you unsure how to use your DNA test results to resolve a research question? Do you want to travel where your ancestors walked and need to find details before you go? Need help joining a lineage society? Whatever your genealogy research question, the answer is Legacy Tree Genealogist. Legacy Tree Genealogist has been helping clients all over the globe discover their story since 2004. Legacy Tree has carefully selected and trained professionals who specialize in hundreds of countries and languages, as well as probate research and DNA analysis. and when you need experts on the ground in the countries where your ancestors came from. Legacy Tree Genealogists calls upon its global network of on-site researchers who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. That's legacytree.com.
All right, let me catch my breath after that last story. Unbelievable stuff. Welcome back. It's Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. David Allen Lambert has rejoined us from Boston as we consider some new questions on Ask Us Anything. And Dave, this first question comes from Spencer in Pleasant Grove, Utah. And Spencer writes, "Guys, I am considering framing some original documents from the 19th century that I recently inherited from a great aunt. Are there any details I should be concerned about with the preservation?" That's a good question and an intelligent question, right, Dave?
Well, and that's an intelligent question right up your alley, kiddo, because you have framed more 19th century stuff than I think that maybe than the Smithsonian has.
Well, I don't know about that, but yeah, there are a lot of details you need to worry about with those documents. First of all, you need to worry about things fading. And I will tell you, as a baseball memorabilia collector, I framed a lot of things when I was young and didn't know any better. And so many of them have really faded, including a Babe Ruth signature I had in my collection. It's faded quite a bit. So over time, you kind of learn these things. The first thing I would suggest is, if you're going to frame the original, and that's another question, you want to make sure that you use acid-free mats so that the acid from a non-acid-free mat doesn't seep into the paper and over time destroy it and destroy the look. So that's number one. The second thing is you want to make sure that light doesn't get through. Now, with UV protective glass, which is a little more expensive, it will keep the light out for the most part. But even with that, it will fade it much more slowly. So if you keep it kind of in a dark hallway or something like that, the UV glass and the acid-free will be really good for anything original that you want to frame. I would suggest, however, that if you want to be really protective of original stuff, that you consider actually framing a copy. And David, you've seen mine. I got this Bible record about 9 years ago that I inherited from a third cousin. It was the Fisher Bible records from the 1840s. They were not in the book itself, but they had been removed, and they were in an envelope when I obtained them, and they were very tattered. So what I did was I went through and I scanned them, and I used Photoshop and cleaned up the discolorations and cleaned up the edges and got them looking actually better than the originals. And then I framed those copies. And as a result of that, I didn't need to have UV glass or anything else to worry about because of the fact they're copies. If they fade or something happens with them, I can make another copy and just pop them in there. So the other side of this then is that you can keep the originals kept away in acid-free sleeves, in binders, and off the floor, of course, to make sure that if any flooding ever happened in your home or something like that, then it's not going to be damaged, and you can protect them for as long as possible. You want to take care of those precious originals. So those are some of the thoughts I have on that. What would you add to that, Dave? What am I missing?
Well, I think the same thing is true with the autographs. I remember framing something back 25 years ago and just doing whatever I could to get regular matte. I wasn't using acid-free, and it stained the photograph.
Yes.
And, and the ink, even if it's a Sharpie, can fade and
break up.
Exactly. It will bubble. I've had that happen with autographs on baseballs. You get the light and you think, this is not going to have any problem. So a lot of times my autographs aren't displayed for the originals or in binders or in acid-free boxes. And I put copies on the wall, and I changed that out in a frame of mixing it up with a picture and a copy of the autograph. That way I can show people, but I'm not putting the autograph at risk.
Right. And this is the same thing you want to do with your ancestral documents. I mean, it's really frustrating if you suddenly realize, oh my gosh, I've damaged this precious thing that goes back more than a century in the family. You are the caretaker of this document, so make sure you do it right. So great question. Thanks for it, Spencer. And we've got another one coming up for you here in minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, time for our final question this week on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and extremegenes.com. Fisher here, David over there in Boston. And this question, Dave, comes from Albertine in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And she says, guys, I am new to genealogy. I know the U.S. Census has been taken every 10 years starting in 1790. What do you do when you need information from in between census years? It's a good fundamental question a lot of people could benefit from.
Really true. Benjamin Franklin says, what is guaranteed in life? Death and taxes. Well, tax records are going to catch people because you're going to pay them every year. And as soon as the federal government kicked in, taxes were being done. And even beforehand, your county, your town, maybe you even paid a tax for the minister at a point in time. So taxes are amazing.
Now, they just give you the taxpayer, though, Dave, right? Not family members.
Correct, but it gives you a name and a location.
Yep.
Then, when a person dies in the middle of the census years, you get their will that will name the people that are their children. Guardianships will be mixed in too, so you can find out who's living with who. Land deeds. Of course, people owning land at a particular time or buying land elsewhere is a census substitute. And oftentimes you'll get at least a spouse, and sometimes it's selling within the family. For love and affection, I sell to my son this property. So you get that too. And then when you get into the 19th century in more urban areas, one of the census substitutes could be perhaps even a state census, like New York and Massachusetts have state censuses that are done in the off years, like 1855 or 1865. City directories are another great way.
Those are so huge because you can actually see people living in the same household or right next door with the same names. You can start to associate people with their ancestors that way. I love directories.
Oh, and it gives you the occupation.
Yes.
So, a lot of times in the census, you find out your ancestor was a laborer. Well, this might tell you exactly he was a tinsmith.
Yeah, but the directories can sometimes tell you when somebody died because the year after they'll say so-and-so deceased on whatever the date was.
Yep. And it's one of these type of things that we think about the census as being the only thing every 10 years when we start in genealogy, but we pick up these little tips like this. And it's going to be regional because what is good for Massachusetts is going to be different for California. It's going to be different for New York and for Florida. And knowing what census substitutes, one of the great websites I turn to is Family Search's Wiki.
Yes.
The Family Search Wiki is great for tips like that. Or put in the name of the state and put in the word census on Ancestry, and you'll find these state censuses that have been transcribed or actually digitized. So there's a lot of ways to find substitutes. Other things are militia lists. So if your ancestor was in the military, so Civil War went on from between 1861 and 65. You get the family in the 60 census and he's dead by 70, finding a militia list that actually says that, well, he was killed at Gettysburg.
Yeah.
Can be that.
And, sometimes even towns have censuses in off years for the federal census. They're a lot rarer, but boy, are they fun when you find them. And I know you've discovered one or two, I think, for your area, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the thing about it is you just have to dig locally, and sometimes it's not all online. So it's going to the local historical societies for that town-related stuff, or checking with your county historical society, your state historical or genealogical groups to see what people have transcribed. And a lot of stuff may already be transcribed and online, and you just need to seek out the original documents. And those could be at state archives or local archives.
Nice. All right, David, thank you so much. And thank you for the question, Albertine. And Dave, that's our show for this week. Thanks for joining us. Talk to you next week.
I look forward to it, my friend. Until then.
And, of course, if you missed the amazing story today with Matamba Austin, you got to check out the podcast, or if you want to hear it again. We are all over the place, of course. iTunes, iHeartRadio, Apple Media, extremegenes.com, Spotify, you name it. We will talk to you again next week. Thanks for joining us. And remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.